Hello everyone, really happy to be here. My name is Rafa Gomez. I'm a software engineer at SEAT Code. First, I'd like to start by apologizing if anybody here came because they expected Codeli TV's Rafa Gomez, not the same guy. So at least I hope you stay. Today we'll be talking about technical debt and how a mid and long-term approach can help us convince product and convince leadership to allow us to fix all of that big ball of mess without impacting product delivery, which at the end is the most important thing that always leads to rejection in these kind of places. The whole approach is also useful not only for technical debt, but also for low priority product features. So there's always some product features that may seem important to somebody, maybe in the team, maybe in the product, but they're not critical, so we won't be able to dedicate the full focus team on that. So this can also be applied to that thing. And we will be focusing specifically on an invitation system, a latest invitation system for one of our biggest or the biggest client that we had at the time. Although the whole process will be seeing some different examples when we go in depth about a specific example and we provide more insights about things, we'll always be focusing on that. Right, so let's start. Let's start by defining what's tech debt in the scope of this talk. To me, tech debt is the accumulated cost of trade-offs and shortcuts that we do during development, although sometimes we do it before starting development as well. And they help us ship faster and deliver things faster, right? So quick temperature, raise your hand if you think technical debt is a bad thing. Is it a good thing? No, right? Raise your hand if you think it's simply a tool that can be good or bad depending on context, situation, and things like that, right? So why do most of the time that I ask these questions, the majority of the votes are it's a bad thing? In my experience, tech debt is a tool, but it's a tool that's easily mismanaged. So let's start with some good examples of tech debt. Let's say I'm a startup and I haven't delivered my idea, and I think I have a really good idea, and I think that I can make it to the market, but I want to validate that idea, I want to test that idea. Is it reasonable for me to have some tech debt in order to get to market faster? Sounds reasonable. Let's say I'm a startup or I'm a established product, let's say Spotify. Spotify wants to deliver a new set of features, but instead of delivering everything with the complete package, they start with a simple one just to test how the users react. Is it okay for Spotify to have some technical debt before that or after that? I think so. So does that mean that tech debt is bad or that it can be misused? So in my experience, the problem with tech debt is maybe 2 or 3. The third one depends a lot on the teams, but the first and most common one is that it's not owned. We own the products. If we work with domain-driven design, we have bounded contents, microservices, and things like that, and we have a clear ownership. This is mine, this is yours, but where's the tech debt? Where's the ownership of that tech debt? We all the team agreed to have that tech debt in order to obtain a greater benefit. Most of the times, we didn't. Most of the time, it's simply, we're back. Most of the time, it's simply a technical standpoint of we want to make this faster just because, or maybe it's an imposition of product management and things like that because the delivery date is unrealistic and we need to make shortcuts. So is it bad? Is it good? As always in this field, it depends, right? So the problem for me with tech debt, it's not the existence of tech debt, it's the absence of action. So the compromise that we need to achieve with product management, leadership, whatever, I'll be using product a lot, but think of product management, leadership, and whatever, depending on the nature of your company and structure. So the problem is not to generate tech debt for a greater thing. The problem is to keep doing that cycle over and over again without attacking that tech debt. So the first one that we need to be able to do as product engineers is make the risk of that tech debt visible to everyone. And the second one, and most important, is to have a commitment from product that we are going to agree to buy this tech debt now, but with a strong commitment that before we start doing new features inside, or after or above this thing, we fix this first. Otherwise, that's when everyone is unhappy with tech debt, right? So how does tech debt affect products and teams? The most simple way of putting this is in the product side, you have a slower delivery, you have more bugs, higher maintenance costs, and inconsistent UX and behavior. And on the team impact, you have increased frustration. Nobody wants to work in these situations. In fact, I didn't put it here, but you may have a problem with retention talent because people will leave. You have knowledge silos, you have less agility, and you have more firefighting. So it's pretty common to assume that these two things are not related or not strictly related, or it's simply a causality effect where one thing causes the other. But then my question is, what comes first? Does the product debt affect product first and then the team? Does it affect first the team and then the product? In my point of view, the first thing is always bugs. And bugs, they are the trigger to a cycle loop that ends up with having all of this. So let's say you're working on a product which is crowded with bugs. A specific part is crowded with bugs. The poor soul that's developing or maintaining that thing is going to be super frustrated about it. There's going to be less agility because development feels risky, so the most common response we have to that is to push back on any possibility of new feature, anything big or small, depending on the criticality. Even sometimes I've seen nothing, we want to work on nothing on this side of the project, which is a natural response, but it's still a problem. And then we have knowledge silos. How many times have we worked on something, we know that's a tech debt or a part that nobody wants to touch, and there's only 1 or 2 engineers that know their way around it. So what happens when that one engineer, 2 if we're lucky, one leaves the company, the other's on holiday, one goes on a paternity leave or maternity leave? What happens on that time lapse? We have a feature, even the smallest of feature, we have a small bug, nothing critical. Just like that, it waits for that developer to come back, right? And then we have a higher maintenance cost because all that, the trust between the clients and ourselves now is being affected because something that should take 15 minutes to 2 weeks because somebody's on holiday. So the end result is tech debt impacts everywhere and everyone, and it's not worth in my eyes to try to separate product and teams as they're always one together. So let's start with the problem we'll be seeing today, but before I start explaining the diagram, let's give a little context about the whole situation, right? Up until June, I worked 5 years in a mobility as a service platform. It was a multi-tenant solution that allowed customers, corporate or non-corporate, to be able to provide features based on their fleets of vehicles. We started with 1 tenant, we scaled up to, I think it was 17 or 20 at the end, and we started with 600 vehicles, only motorbikes, up to 10,000 with 7 different types of vehicles, even boats. So it was pretty hard. And the fact that it was multi-tenant and everything needed to be comfortable added a lot of complexity. Then one day, the biggest client we had, which was a German corporation, wake up and decided that they were not happy with our user registration process. They wanted to be able to use their internal software, which was based on SAP software, accountability software, and things like that, to be able to perform complex logic in bulk within our user base, which our back office obviously was not designed in order to do that. So it was a problem, and it created some friction, right? The problem with this is we were an early startup. We may have been in production for a year and a half or 2. We needed the money, and they had money, and they were willing to pay a lot. So as any reasonable mind, we said yes, and we implemented it. My team was focused on, or was the owner of the user management system, the authentication authorization part of the platform, and the communication one. But when this team came, we had our hands full with things, so we weren't able to do this. So the boundaries got broken, and another team stepped up and tried to help. But once again, we as people trying to be a little bit greedy, we want to increase or maximize the margin of profit. So if it costs me in developer time 60 to do this feature and they pay me 100, if I can do it in 20, I gain more money, right? So the new team came in, they did it as fast as they could. It's not trying to create beef or anything, but these things happen, and they created this system. So this system basically means that the operator of the German company creates or exports a CSV where each row has all the necessary data of the users that they want to perform bulk operations in. And they have a choice column we could have 3 values, 1, 2, and 3. From now on, we will refer to those as taste 1, taste 2, taste 3, right? So taste 1 meant registering the user in our platform, creating an invitation for them, and sending it via an email with an invitation code that they needed to input on registration, so everything automatically worked. It was also a security feature that they wanted to be able to not allow external users to the company to be able to use the service, although we think that SSO might have been a better idea, but they demand. Then, as they grew bigger in our use cases, they created more services. We started with only a car service, around 100 cars. At the end, they had a bike service for their employees, a motorbike, and a car. So that meant that each one of these cases had more branching and more configurations depending on them. So case 1 exploded and got into if I call case 1 and the user has no invitations, I create the code, I send it via an email. If I call case 1 and the invitation exists but it's not accepted, meaning the user has not registered yet, I add this new service, so they automatically are granted access when they register. And in the third scenario, which is I do it and the user is already in the platform, they need to be granted access. So something that was supposed to be only on user management had already taken roots on authentication, authorization, and even a little bit on communication, right? Then case 2 was a little bit simpler. It was simply to remove access from a user. And case 3, which was a little bit of a mind blown at the time, they wanted this to be the default for anything. So if the case 3 was invoked, the first step was to update the information inside that invitation. Afterwards, they updated the profile information of that user. Afterwards, they update the expiration of that user because they wanted users to lose access to some services every 6 months. And afterwards, we generated this report, and this report is the one we sent to the client. Between these 3 bit blocks on case 3, there were redirections to case 1 because they didn't feel like trying to update something that does not exist is an error. They said that if you know it doesn't exist, just create it. So redirected to case 1 and that's it, which turned out to be quite complicated, right? All of this was done in a single HTTP REST request. So we created a bottleneck that the content of the CSV, the amount of lines, it crashed the timeout. The REST default timeout are 30 seconds. This reached with, I think it was 40 rows. It was very complicated. If you added 50, the whole back office would crash out, the wide screen and all of that. So not the best idea, even though they paid for, right? But surprisingly, they were happy. This is a simplified version for the sake of not disclosing private information. So this is a simplified version of all the conditions and I/O operations that needed to be done and the redirections and things. So if you think this is complex, it was even more complex. Because here, I'm not showing you the rules behind authentication access, grant permission, revoke, and things like that, right? So what symptoms was the team experiencing at this point? We were in constant firefighting mode. There was always something on the way to do about the invitation legacy system. Oh, dear. Whenever a bug came, fixes caused new bugs, so it was a cyclical problem. We had no visibility or observability whatsoever, so we had no traces, no logs, no metrics, no nothing in the whole workflow. So whenever a new support ticket or a bug ticket came, we needed to ask our member or our customer support team to ask the employee of the other company, hey, do you guys have the CSV that you inputted to try to start with something? And the problem was that the person that created the support ticket was most likely not the person who encountered the error. So that's another ask, and hey, do you have the CSV? Hey, it was a week ago, I don't have it. So it was incredibly difficult to fix anything or even investigate some bugs. And in a multi-tenant solution, it's the rule of thumb is you want to try to have all features impact as many tenants as possible, so you can provide as much value, right? So having a specific client which is not aligned with our product vision, and we did this as a cash grab and should not take out this many time of the team, spending this many time of the team was a problem, right? Because in our industry, developer time equals money. So The best thing we could end up getting was they let us have a sprint of 1 button to fix this. And our estimation was 2 buttons, 2 months. And as I said before, we had a lot of need of money. So 2 months, 2 buttons, way too much opportunity cost on the product delivery. Who's paying for those 2 buttons? We said, let's try with the client. But the client said, hey, this thing works incredible. If you compare with the SAP system that I have inside, this only fails about 30% of the situations. So I'm not paying, and rightfully so, because they already paid a huge amount for something that should work on the first try, right? So it's impossible to now, who pays for this? It's impossible to determine. So the inside joke came up that at this point, it was not a sprint, it was, we needed a marathon. And that's how the marathon approach came to exist. Is this some state-of-the-art revolutionary planning process that we discovered? No. It's a super simple one of 5 steps that allows us, this can be used for either low product features or low requirement product features, as well as the depth. So it's basically a small increment approach with a plan split in phases, independent phases, with major milestones at the end of each step, that it's able to simply slide some of that work into each sprint, and you don't affect delivery. So it's nothing super complicated, it just takes some work. These are the 5 steps that we created. The first one is step identification. In this step, we pinpoint exactly what problems is the team facing, what problems, how do they affect our platform, do they affect us as a team, do they affect the product, do they affect the tenant, the client, the user, the end user. Then we have measure and document, where we try to find metrics, numbers, ways to objectively describe the situation, the impact, the criticity. We have maybe the most enjoyable one if you're an engineer, which is solution design. We go back to a whiteboard. Now we have problems and metrics. Let's try to find a solution that fits all of this. And then we have the 4th one, which is most likely the one that creates most frustration with engineers, which is trying to get product to buy into this whole refactor approach and give us some time and grant us time, which is where most of the friction comes in. And then we have prioritization, that this is only a conditional, because if this is a no, this doesn't make any sense. So first one, quick question. I'm going to say a little story, and if you feel identified with it, just raise your hand. I joined a company, okay? I joined a new team, and I spent, let's say, 2 months on it. And over those 2 months, every week, every 2 weeks, I keep hearing the same thing. This part is broken, no one wants to touch that part, we have a lot of legacy, we have the debt, we've tried to fix this, but they won't give us time. Does this sound familiar? Because I haven't gone into any team that this wasn't the case, right? So if this is super familiar, then I go to our system and I try to find something regarding this debt, this problem, right? I go to Jira and I see no debt backlog, okay? Then I try to look for a milestone or an epic, and there isn't. Then I try to look for user stories about that debt, and there aren't. And then I say, silly me, it's in Notion, for sure it's in Notion. And then I go to Notion, and there is no documentation in Notion about that debt. So all of that debt that we have is in my head, in your head, in his head, and what happens when 2 of us leave and you're on holiday? Now what? What happens then if we have an opportunity to focus on some of this debt and we don't have a plan? We might waste more time coming up with the plan than the time we had, so now nothing gets done, right? So we needed to start with the habit of identifying debt and writing it down. So the first thing to identify debt is to have a common set of criteria. This worked for us, but it's not a silver bullet, so it may not work for all your situations. So what we did was, if something has frequent bugs or incidents, that's a pretty big tell, right? The no one wants to touch that part, pretty big candidate for it to be a third debt. Manual workarounds or unclear ownership, soft. Depends on the content, may be or may not. Lack of observability, the biggest red flag we had. To me, this is a critical one. It's not even a discussion, this is a problem, we need to fix it. Then we have in multi-tenant environments, high coupling to specific clients might be bad. And the last one, the limiters for new features, might come in 2 flavors. You may have the flavor of the absence of something limits our ability to implement new features in a specific domain, or you may have the state of something limits our ability to implement new features in a given domain. We'll see examples of one of those around now. So we came up, we discussed this, and these were the three things that we came up with. Now, Rafa, I have a question. Who does this? Is this supposed to be the whole team doing it? Is just me as a button and my button colleague? Are both of us and another button from another team? It depends on your situation. Ideally, it's a whole thing, or something that the whole team needs to do. We thought that dev needs to be owned the same way as product needs to be owned. So the whole dev must come from the whole team. You'd be surprised of how much things come up if you made people do their homework with a same list of criteria and give them a week or so to think, and then you create a meeting. And that brainstorm would not be 3, would be 20, 30 things, especially if you have a multidisciplinary team with mobile, front-end, back-end all put together, right? So in our case, we weren't able to do that at that time with the whole team, so my colleague of back-end and I did it. The next semester, the whole team did it. So sometimes it's not about maturity, sometimes people just need a little push. So take it upon yourself, be proactive, and do it yourself. We came up with these 3 things. Change email and phone number. It may sound silly, but careful with Cognito's initial settings, so they're not really resilient to changes. Then we had a communication bounded context, but we lacked a communication module and centralized notification aggregate. So there were a lot of features missing that we were not able to do because of the absence of something. And then the invitation system we just talked about. So great, now we have 3 Notion pages explaining the problem, how it impacts, but we need numbers. So now we started asking ourselves, okay, how common is this? Who does it affect? How critical is that affectation? Are there any way so they can recover on themselves? Do they need time from the team? Do we have a manual workaround to avoid these kinds of things? And it's simple. It's based on communication and systems. If you have absolutely no observability, this is going to be hard. So first, start with observability. In our case, the allow customers to change phone and number and email. It came from the legal department of our company, who said that it was at that time required by GDPR. But it was required with a caveat. It's required for any digital system to be able to provide this feature, but that doesn't mean it has to be fully automated and fully integrated in the app. So our process, which was a really bad one, was you create a support ticket to the tenant redirects it to us. We do it from Cognito CLI in 5 minutes, but for technical specification of Cognito, you need to reset the password. So you may have a week, 2 weeks without knowing, and all of a sudden you can log in. So not the ideal experience. But it took us 5 minutes when we had it, right? And we had 2 or 3 monthly requests. So it was hard to justify a lot of time or full focus on this thing. But these numbers are lying, because this is an average. The reality was that in 5 months span, we might have 4 months of no request, and then over the span of 6 to 8 days, we have 15. So it's a lot of context switching, so even though it's 5 minutes, it's still a problem. Not a huge one, but a problem. Then we have the communication module. As I said, we were already sending communications to our customers. We were sending emails with invoices, we were sending reports to our customers, but since we had no notification aggregate, we were lacking that centralized logic that was scattered throughout the bounded context, and we were lacking the tracking. So a lot of the time, we found out that a report didn't got sent because of a support ticket. Hey, we didn't receive the monthly financial report, which in that time that we had an OKR-led link to customer satisfaction, not the greatest thing. And some other clients were actively requesting more features to be built upon communication. So things like campaigns, schedule notification, block list, notification center, and things like that. But the lack of that centralized notification aggregate was a blocker for all of those things. Notification campaigns were able to be done with a manual workaround from Firebase console. So again, manual workaround, not something that we want to be doing. And then we had the most difficult one to assess in this step, which was the invitation system, because since we had no observability at all these numbers, or most of them, needed to be told to us by the client, which is not always the greatest image that you want to give as a company. So we discovered the limit of 40 invitations, a 30% error rate. 28 of those 30 points were 500s and timeouts and crashes to the back office, which was horrendous. And then we have 3 to 5 weekly bugs, average, constant. The less was 3. I don't think I saw less than 3. So great, now we have documentation with numbers, so we can start with the solution design, right? How do we solve solutions for a long-term approach is way different when they cannot be prioritized. It's not the same having a big feature that we know we can spend 3 months continuously working, or 8 hours a day through 2-3 buttons for the complete team, than something that we may have 18-month planning process, and maybe you do a small user story a sprint. So in our case, we needed to focus on solving root causes, not just symptoms. So don't focus in the invitation system. Do not focus on augmenting the invitation rows allowed per CSV. That's not the thing we want to focus on. We want to focus on why does it happen. And it's happening because everything is being done in a single REST connection, everything is synchronous, everything is being iteratively computed. Then we need to plan in phases. One of the problems that we may find is that if we plan in 8 months ahead of time, priorities shift. Things change. So you may be able to spend the 3 months as planned, then a 2-month stop because of something, then you go again. So it's important to have phases clearly delimited and ideally independent of one another as much as possible. The same way things change for the bad, they also change for the good, and sometimes you can attack 2 phases at the same time as well. So make sure you plan in phases. Then at the end of each phase, it must have a deliverable value, and it should be visible and easy to understand. In our case, we had milestones. The main reason for this is the same way things change, the opinions of product and upper management may change as well. If we've been doing this for 3 months and nothing is being seen as valuable, we're at risk of being pulled out of all this process gets cancelled, and the trust between us and management is broken. And when the things break, it's really hard to get it back. And then we need a way to measure progress, right? So in our case, we needed metrics. So what's the easiest metric that we didn't have? The symptoms that we were complaining about. So the CSV file size, the error rate. So we need something to be able to act as a compass so that in every step we can say we're doing good or we're not doing good. These were our decided metrics. Some of them were symptoms like the error rate and reported bugs, but some of them were metrics that we wanted to have to be able to take a look into the scalability and the usage of the solution. So for example, maximum daily invitation was for scalability and being able to understand how the company uses our product, error rate, reported bugs, symptoms that we were already complaining about, maximum CSV rows, and average, things to understand the chunks of authentication, the processes that are being used. So if we incremented to 500 and they only use 200, we might stop. We don't need to optimize further. This is the solution that we came up with. So we kept the invitation aggregate and invitation module, but we created a new aggregate and concept which was called invitation process. So the responsibility beforehand was all in the invitation. Now we split it between the invitation logic and the logic of the whole process of invitation, retry, sending the end report, and things like that. The main thing that we wanted to tackle was to make this asynchronous. So we used events, and we were already using an event-driven architecture. When the invitation process is created, we now store the CSV data and after it was validated, so we could finally debug things quickly. We created an event and published it. This event scheduled an invitation process, and every time a row was processed, either good or bad, the invitation process reacted to it. When everything was finished, we received all the information of the report, of the invitation process. We created a report and sent it to the customer. This report also added a couple of features that were missing beforehand. Beforehand, we only said this email failed, and now we added this email failed and a human readable error to understand what's going on, right? So this is the solution, but still, this was the idea at the beginning, 2 months work, 2 backends. Even if you come up to this point, nobody's gonna give you this time. Me myself, I would not give myself time of 2 months if this is what I'm presented with. So we split it in phases. Same as criteria, phases the shape of the phases may vary a lot depending on the nature of your product. So in our case, it was really easy because it was pretty straightforward, right? We created a new attribute and a new module. That was the first one. The bit delivery at the end, or the bit milestone, we now were able to process a CSV, store everything, and schedule the whole thing, even though it was not connected. The whole thing was not connected yet. Then we started with the cases, case 1, case 2, case 3, and lastly, the redirections. Once everything is done, the last part of the phase is always the rollout plan. I didn't go into details here because rollout plan has enough knowledge to be a separate talk, but in our case, we use shadow traffic and feature flags. If, in case nobody or anybody doesn't know what shadow traffic is, we basically redirected traffic from the old flow to the new one without the new one impacting anything in production, and checked with the metrics. So once we were happy with the results the metrics were showing to us, we just coordinated with their tenant, say, hey, this Monday we start, we have a feature flag in place. If you see anything, or now that we have more alarms monitoring and things like that, if we see anything, we switch back to the other one when we investigate. Now, the hardest part here, right? I've heard a lot about people complaining that I'm not given time to fix things, it's impossible, product doesn't respect these things, and all of that. And in my opinion, 90% of the time is our fault. Explaining deeply technical things to people without a technical background, it's hard. It's a really valuable skill, and it's a skill that it's not always developed by everyone. So this is what we came up with to be able to consistently get product to buy into this. So first of all, explain the problem. Side note, not trying to invalidate your feelings, but try to avoid talking about feelings as much as possible. The way you and I feel about the same problem may not be aligned. And when that feeling is not aligned, I reject your proposal, which is what happened with the client. The client was happy with it, not the happiest, but was happy, and we were clearly not happy. We came up with all of this just to fit the invitation system. So explain the problem in the most objective way you can, and the easy way to do that is with numbers. That's why the step 2 is to create numbers that are objective, or the most objective that we can. It's better to have rough estimation numbers than no numbers. So don't take the numbers as the ultimate truth that need to be super precise. Then present the plan. If you come up to me asking a month of time just to tell me the problem, that's an instant rejection. If you come up with a plan, that might be 50% rejection. But if that plan is independent, is in phases, and you can promise me and assure me that it will not affect product delivery, it's really hard for me to, at the very least, say yes, but not now. So come up with a plan. The next 2 ones are, to me, one of the most important ones that are connected to business value. In almost every company that I've ever been, there's a gap between business and engineering, or product and engineering, and it's easier in my eyes so that an engineering person can close that gap, learning things about product, which is the figure of product engineer and product mindset, than the other way around. So be the one that closes that gap. So what's the easiest way to close that gap? Connect things to business value. In our case, with the example of the invitation systems, we have an OKR about client satisfaction. So you as a client, would you be happier if you paid for something and now all of a sudden I tell you, free of charge, I'm going to fix all the problems this workflow has, you have nothing to be worried of, and it's free? It's just gonna take 6 months. I think, do you guys think that the satisfaction result would be the same? I think at the very least it would be a little higher. If you end up going through and you provide the results that you promised, maybe we have a little even better result at the end. But then there's the time equals money thing that we talked about. If we want money in this moment and we need for money, why are we allowing ourselves to waste money in developer time to fit something that is not aligned with our core values and our product vision? It doesn't make any sense, right? And then there's the opportunity cost. Think of all the things we could be doing if we do not have to worry about the invitation system constantly being a problem. And the other way around is make risk visible and manageable. So the same way we talked about the good things, talked about what could happen if we do not tackle this. So the same examples that you said, but the other way around. What happens if now all of a sudden this bidder client just decides to want to increase the user from 2,000 users to 4,000 users? Now that 30% error rate in the absolute value is way more. So this implies more support tickets when our customer support team is already at full capacity, which means delays on those tickets, which means delays on the bug fixes, which means lower satisfaction in the OKR result, bad result. But then we have the same problem. If the support time and developer time increases, wasting time on this part, it's even more money that we're throwing away by doing something that it doesn't align with our product value, and it's even more cost of opportunity of things that we could be doing, right? And the last but not least, and it's a subtle one, but I think it works really well, is do not ask for permission. Ask for prioritization. When you ask for permission, you might always get two answers. It's yes or no. And if you ask for prioritization, those go to 4. It's a yes, no, and yes, but not now, not, but let's talk in a month. So this subtle change of tone, it changes a lot in the outcome. So we did it. We got product to buy into the whole refactoring. Our plan was 6 months, up to 8, depending on certain sensors that might be outside of our control. They agreed, they came on board, and then we started with prioritization. How do we prioritize this? Get together. It's a simple meeting. 30 minutes, you'll have it done. So we did it, and we have these 2 things. Now, some of you may have noticed there are things missing here. The change of user and email got deprioritized, and that sucks. Because before presenting something, we needed to come up with the solution design, the phases, the metrics, and all of that. But that doesn't mean, as I said, it's not a no. It's a not for now. So the next time, I don't know the future, maybe in 3 months, we have 150 support tickets for that, and that thing is already at the top of our priority list. And since we already have the solution designed and in phases, we don't even have to implement it ourselves. We can give it to somebody else. So we started with the invitation system, and we have the communication module as a substitute in case the invitation system works really well for this semester. And fast forward a year after completing everything, and these are the results. So our maximum daily invitations went from 200 to 1,600, 8x improvement. The error rate went from 30% combining 400s and 500s to only 400s due to data validation 171. The reported bugs a week were 3 a week, now we're 2 a year, and it was a problem with the migration process, which we're quite happy with it. The maximum rose 10x from 35 to 360, 370. The average rose another 10x from 50 to 150, and this doesn't mean this is the limit of the feature. It just means it's the limit of what they need. So if they're not matching anything and the error rate does not go up, we're not going to invest any more time in it. If all of a sudden, now that we have observability and monitoring, we start seeing the error rate increase because of the size of the time, that's another step to detect a problem and just fix it. And I pulled this one at the end because 2 months after completing the process, this was just a quick cash grab for one client, our biggest one, nothing else. But then 2 corporations came around and they wanted a similar feature, and we asked and we told them this is not something we're going to maintain, we're not going to develop, there are no deviation or no branches to come from here. As long as you agree with that and you pay, we might enable this. And they agreed to it. So not only did we save time and money in developer time, so we also increased our revenue by selling this feature to other tenants. This was unthinkable. The team wouldn't have allowed this at the beginning, no matter the money that was sent. And my grandpa always used to say that opportunities come for those who have prepared, and we talked about having the communication module process ready. At that time, we have an internal team of 3 backends that, due to some priority shifting and they finishing things beforehand, they had a 3 weeks blend. So we already had this thing and the solution was already designed. So we just gave it to them, supervised the solution in the implementation. So we made sure the same error with the invitation in the first hand did not happen again. And by the end of the 6 months, we were only expecting to have the invitation system, but we ended up having both of those things. Fast forward the next semester, all of the features that we wanted to have regarding notification center and all of those things were all implemented. Maybe 6 to 8 months before we were expecting them, just because we had this plan ready. So sometimes a not for now is not a rejection, and even if it is, we need to be able to deal with it because priorities shift and change, and things change as well. So key takeaways from this: long-term thinking. I know it sucks. Delayed gratification is not something we're programmed to do. It's really hard sometimes to keep doing something without seeing the actual picture or the actual reward at the end. But you'd be amazed about how much things you can change on a platform if you give yourself or your team 2 years and you simply go doing small steps. We need to have a product mindset, especially in today's AI era. To me, a tech people only caring about technical things, it's not acceptable anymore. So we have to understand the business, be proactive about it, detect problems, raise our hand, and not only detect problems, come up with solutions. And if those solutions can even be faced and not avoid conflict with the product delivery, even better. It's even easier for people to accept it. We need to learn to deal with rejection. I know it sucks. We spend time. We design things. We went and investigated metrics, and the change email and password wasn't done. Spoiler: it still isn't done, and it might not be done next year also. But it is what it is, right? And then small increments. The same way we said that tech debt can be attacked in small increments, it works the same for product features, independently of their priority. High priority product features and low priority product features and technical debt can always be implemented in small increments. It's the safest way to be able to provide constant value to our customers and be able to shift if anything happens on productions and react to it. So that's all from my side. Thank you to the sponsors and the organization for giving me the platform. If you guys have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. And if not, we can grab a coffee afterwards and talk about things. So thank you very much.